Morning, everyone. In autumn, we feel the aging of the year. The silver frost begins to paint our lawns and flowers. The days shorten and grow cooler, and time seems to slow down. We find our sweaters and we dig in the back of the closet for our boots, and we think about firewood and extra blankets. The holidays beckon with Halloween just around the corner. Autumn days can be bright and so clear, with just enough heat in the afternoon to remind us of summer gone by. But the dropping temperatures in the evening remind us that winter is on the way. We cook soup and we make hot cocoa. We light the first fire. The sun sets earlier. The world changes, but all is well. My sermon today is looking at verbal cues and silent cues and the kind of spiritual quality that listening gives us. I have a dear friend that I've never met. She lives in California, and we met on Facebook, and we just kind of clicked. And I'm going to read you a story that she wrote and posted. And she's talking about how listening affects her job as a professional nanny. She says, I was brought up in a culture, and I believe that her culture used to be kind of a very strange form of Christianity. She says she was taught bodily sensations could not be trusted. And if your body feels anything, it's bad because your flesh belongs to the material world. And she was taught physical desire of any kind needed to be overcome. And she says the impact of this taught her not to trust her own body or her feelings, not to trust her emotions, and she believed that she wasn't good. She wasn't to be trusted, period. But 13 years ago, she said, I had an epiphany. My body is good. I am good. I am whole and complete, and I don't need anything. I don't need to do anything. I don't need to overcome my body or my feelings. And I started to learn how to honor my body, respect my body, and to listen to what it is telling me. She went to work one morning, and she realized that the little girl she took care of was very sick. She said, I offered her breakfast, and she shook her head no and fussed, which she never did. She said to the girl, you don't want your breakfast, you don't feel good. And the little girl nodded. And then she cried as she walked to her bedroom. I followed, and she pointed to the closet as well as her crib. I said, you're telling me something I don't understand. I want to know what you're trying to say. I'll open the closet door and you point at what you want. So the little girl pointed at the laundry basket and pulled out her nightgown. And I said to her, you want to go back to sleep, don't you? And she nodded yes. And so I got her a clean nightgown and I tidied her crib while she put it on. And I asked her, would you like a story read to you? And she said no. And so I picked her up and I held her for a moment. And I looked at her eyes. And I realized that she was asking me to trust her. To trust that what she needed was sleep. And so I put her down and tucked her in. And in just a few seconds, she was fast asleep. And I think that story tells us how important listening is, especially when we're dealing with unequal power structures, adults dealing with children who haven't learned to speak fully yet, how important that is to honor what they're feeling, to try to understand. And that ability to listen and to understand, to try to put yourself in someone else's shoes, can be extremely difficult. 2 weeks ago, I was laying flat on my back in the dentist office getting my teeth cleaned. And the technician was a very warm, talkative woman, and I was the first patient of the day, and I think she assumed that I was just like her. I realized that she was a devout Christian, probably rather conservative, and she shocked me with her first question, which was, "Are you a Proverbs 31 woman?" Now, it's extremely hard to hold a conversation with sharp instruments in your mouth. And it's also uncomfortable to know that a religious discussion is going to take place with me being the helpless listener, and she witnessing away unimpeded. And at first I got really upset. I was nervous, and I was thinking, this is so unprofessional. I really didn't think it should be going on, and I wondered, how many people does she do this to? Or is it just me? I was actually surprised by how kind of panicked I got. And I tried to step away from myself to calm myself down. And I recognized that old feeling of being trapped, having to listen to things that you didn't agree with. And I guess I hadn't been in that situation in quite some time. And so I decided to listen. There wasn't much choice. But as she talked, I really began to empathize with her, which surprised me. But she was a very caring, very decent woman. And she started to talk to me about her struggles in fulfilling her idea of the Proverbs 31 woman. And I was laying there trying to remember what that chapter said. And I knew that my old church always quoted the very first part, but they never talked about the rest. And so all I could remember was the very beginning, which says, "Who can find a virtuous woman, for her price is far above rubies." And my old church always implied that finding a virtuous woman was almost impossible. So as she talked, I resolved to go home and read the verses just to see what I thought of it now, just to see the different perspective. And I was a little bit surprised because the story seemed a little bit, maybe had some liberal tones to it. And there was actually a lot of things I agreed with. So I want you to see what you think of these few verses. This is a man named King Lemuel, who's never mentioned again in the Bible. And he's speaking to his son. And he says, "The heart of the woman's husband safely trusts in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. She finds wool and flax and works willingly with her hands. She is like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and gives meat to her household and a portion to her handmaidens. She considers a field and buys it, and with the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. She girds her loins with strength and strengthens her arms. She perceives that her merchandise is good. Her candle goes not out by night. She lays her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. She stretches out her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches forth her hands to the needy. She's not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. She makes herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Her husband is in the gates where he sits among the elders of the land. She makes fine linen and sells it, and delivers unto the merchant. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she will rejoice in time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. So in looking at this picture, my first thought was, well, this is all good and well and fine. She sounds like a very successful businesswoman. She sounds like she's ruling a small empire. But for today's woman to look at that as something they need to fulfill, that they need to be good with business, with their home, with everything that they do, that it needs to be well done and successful, I thought, what a thing to have to live up to. First of all, this woman starts out with servants. She has a group of women that she's actually taking care of, who are doing the chores. We don't have things like that today. It sounds like she starts out with money. We all know that the common saying is it takes money to make money. She has the power and the wealth to buy things, to sell things, to buy pieces of property. To me, this is such a story of class issues. This is just layered with signs of privilege that this woman has and she begins with. And I immediately thought of how many Christians today are poor, and the messages that they're constantly being sent of how you earn God's favor and how you earn worth in the systems of the churches today. I've always been really, really disturbed by what they call the prosperity gospel. The prosperity gospel is a form of Christianity that offers their people a view of God that promises material blessings to those who have faith and to those who give generously, not to God, but to the preacher. And it sets up a classist hierarchy. Those who are poor must be lacking in faith, or not giving enough in tithes. It's kind of sounds like a pyramid scheme with the minister at the very top. And it seems a cruel game. The struggle to earn the blessings and the love of God, defined like this, can be devastating to the poor. God seems to love the rich. And the only way for the poor to be blessed is to give away what little they have. And it just seems so cruel. At this point, the woman cleaning my teeth changed the topic. And to add to my discomfort, she put one of those cloths over my face with the opening in the mouth. And she began to blast my teeth with this baking soda solution. And she chose that moment to deliver her views on people who are on welfare and her ideas for getting everyone in America off of welfare. And I thought, oh, here we go. And she said, I want to tell you about my grandfather and grandmother who, in hard times, went fishing to put meat on the table. And she said, I think if we teach everyone to fish, we wouldn't have to have welfare anymore. And I was like, oh my gosh. So, it was probably a really good thing that my mouth was full of baking soda. It certainly helps your listening abilities. And she went on with things that I don't want to repeat. we all know that there are myths in America today that are broadcast all the time. These myths of the founding fathers were all Christians, that every person in America can be successful if they work and study hard. And this path to the American dream can work for many, but we have to realize the playing field is unequal. It's not accessible to everyone. That to those mired in poverty, there's often no escape. It very much depends on where you're born, your opportunities, your surroundings, your skin color, your ability to stay in school, the kind of nurturing that you receive. And a host of things can either drag a child down or lift them up, and sadly, nothing is fair. And so this true story is much more complicated than the lovely myth that gets told about the pioneers and the self-sufficiency. It's just so much more difficult, so much more gray areas. But she ended her little simple myth, her dream for America, by saying, I don't want you to think that I'm uncaring or unfeeling. I just want to see people succeed. She said, I know that I worked hard and I made it, and I believe everyone else can as well. And as frustrated as I was, I had to realize that she did have a very sincere kindness at her heart. It just seemed to me that she had never read much, never examined beyond her dream, didn't read about lives that were completely different than her experience. She finished up with me, and I sat up, and I knew that I only would probably have maybe 1 or 2 sentences to say back to her. And I'm almost always nice. I hope. Because I think that trying to phrase your comments nicely goes a lot farther with most people. And so I said, you know what? I said, have you ever heard that the unemployment rate for young black men is very close to 60%? And I said, and do you also know that there are more black men in prison today than were in slavery before the Civil War? And her face just totally changed. And she said, I had no idea. She said, are you sure? And I said, all you need to do is Google it. I said, the problem is their experience is so different than ours. I said, it just isn't fair. And I think she was a little bit mortified and a little bit frightened. And she just looked like I had given her something that she'd never even remotely heard of. And that is the problem. If you can be an adult in America today, you've gone through school, you've gone through college, you live in, you go to a church regularly, and you never hear about these things, that it's just something foreign, I wonder what it is that we're doing wrong. I wonder if a worldview this simple, this one-size-fits-all, lacking in nuance, with settled truth that can't be shaken by facts, with kind of a shallow view of history, is a form of protectionism, a form of tribalism. It's easier, maybe, you don't have to think and reason and look beyond what you currently believe. And the world is so complex, it can be tempting to isolate yourself with people who just agree with you, to watch and listen only the things that agree with your view. And I sometimes force myself to look beyond what I agree with, just to make sure that I listen to the stories and I listen to other people who live in other parts of our country so that I can know what it's like a little bit. Unitarian Universalism calls us to struggle with complexities, to listen and understand others, to walk in paths that we're not comfortable with. We try to grasp what life is like, and we wrestle with the big questions. We don't claim that we have all the answers, but that's okay. I would rather have a question than to have the wrong answer.